Kiss me, kiss me, infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me, take me, wanna be a victim, but it feels like shit. Your touch is everything, it's supernatural.
Good evening and welcome to the Polymath podcast. My name is Ashraq and I'm very excited to be here with you tonight because we've got a great show and we've got lots to talk about, lots to get into regarding the Iran war, the political, the military, and the economic dimensions that come with it. And it's going to be a long show. It's going to be a long show after a while. I know we haven't done a show in like the last 4 weeks. It has been Ramadan and things have been stacking up a lot. And to be honest, for much of Ramadan, or right at the end of, like last 2 or 3 weeks-ish, I was totally out of commission. I had a sore throat. I could barely speak a minute without having a cough. And I just literally couldn't push myself to do a show. And my schedule was totally stacked with a lot of stuff I had to do. And it just was never possible for me to do an episode. And, well, now we're here today. So let's kind of get into today's episode. It's kind of interesting. It was one of those days I was invited into a suhoor with the boys, and it was before midnight. I had checked the news. I always follow up with the news. I'm always there. And things were looking actually pretty positive. The Omani foreign minister, he did an interview with, I believe, CBS News, and he was talking about a deal being within reach. And in the early morning hours of February 28th, I believe, is when Donald Trump and Israel go out of their way to launch a joint combat operations major combat operations against Iran. Operation Ep.3 begins, and now we are what? We're officially on day 30 of the war, and things are not looking good. We're in the 4th week. It was supposed to end sooner than they thought. The military objectives that they set out to accomplish, they're quite far from even achieving any of the stated objectives with regards to regime change, with regards to massively degrading their capabilities, that they wouldn't retaliate. And things are not looking great. They bombed all of Iran. They launched major strikes against the IRGC headquarters. There are several bases across Iran. They attacked police stations. They attacked the besieged forces. They attacked the military sites, the missile silos, the missile launchers. They also again did a strike on the nuclear enrichment facilities. So it was a comprehensive attack against all of these targets that were kind of important, very critical military infrastructures for the Iranian government. And what seems to be the case is they thought decapitating the leadership would help. And in that effort, I think within 24 to 48 hours, I believe the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was assassinated. He was effectively killed. And now in a latest escalation, about 2 weeks ago, I believe, or a week ago, they killed Ali Larijani, who was a secretary of Iran's National Security Council. He was one of the negotiators negotiating the deal prior to the war. And this is the guy they eventually went after. They killed him. They also killed the chief of the besieged forces. To be very honest, Larijani, his contributions to the Iranian regime's defense doctrine has been pretty significant from what I've seen. This is a person who have engaged with not only with Islamic doctrine, Islamic Shi'i doctrine, but he also is deep with regards to Western philosophy. The person he's very deeply, like, he's a very deep person in terms of his thoughts, in terms of his philosophical ideas. He sort of provided that philosophical scaffolding for Iran's defense doctrine, and he was big on Kant's categorical imperative. He also delved into a bit of Descartes. So he kind of used that logic, those philosophical ideas, kind of fused it with the doctrine of the Iranian government in terms of defense, in terms of negotiations, in terms of diplomacy, in all different aspects of the Iranian state. And his death marked a pretty significant escalation. And what we see now is a state where the United States and Israel haven't achieved much, despite the fact that they've eliminated key leaders of the Iranian regime. Well, what we still see at this stage is the fact that despite doing that, despite eliminating the top leadership, they're still having to deal with the amount of ballistic missiles and drones that's been continuous, that almost feels perpetual to this stage. And the interceptor systems are just overwhelmed at this stage, dealing with the amount of attacks that the Iranian regime has been capable of mounting against several targets in the Gulf, and also Israel in particular. Now, the last time we were kind of talking about the extent of Iranian capability in terms of retaliating, in terms of using their vast arsenal, their kind of diversified arsenal of missiles that they have, and the kind of great drone technology they have in terms of attacking these bases, these U.S. military bases in the region across the Gulf. And they have successfully dealt a heavy blow to the United States in the region. But the last time I was talking about the drone technology, I was talking about the effectiveness of Iranian attack drones, Iranian drones in particular, which is the Shahed drone. The Goyim, they started lecturing me about U.S. electronic warfare capabilities in terms of jammers, electronic jammers that they could possibly deploy and render these drones inoperable and kind of defend themselves against these drone attacks. Even if there are swarms of drones, they could just jam all of them and just fend off all of those attacks. 13 military bases across Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, across the region, 13 military bases, US military bases, have been rendered inoperable. They've been taken offline. And this is the amount of chaos, this is the amount of havoc the Iranian drones have wreaked. So when I speak about war, when I speak about these matters, I kind of do my research. So the Goyim need to shut the hell up and listen sometimes, because I'm growing frustrated at the stage where I can't have it anymore. They keep lecturing me about war, about politics, about philosophy, about all of this stuff, when I was always right about the drones. I was right about the Kurds being potentially used as a ground force. Negotiations were there. This was way before the United States held those negotiations, because this is a historical pattern that follows. And I was also right about the negotiations being potentially a ruse for an impending war or impending combat operations that came to be. Anyways, let's get into our big story tonight, which is the major ground invasion which seems to be currently underway in Iran. The preparations are underway, and the fact that the Houthis yesterday have joined the war in an official capacity. And what seems to be the case is that Trump has used all his cards. He has used all his cards. He has escalated in an exceeding way regarding using the bombers, using the US's major capabilities. He's unleashed all of the US Air Force. He's bombed all of Iran. He's taken out major facilities, major sites. And yet he seems to be farther from his goal than ever. And Iran just keeps doubling down. Iran has not buckled at all. Iran just keeps doubling down, and they are standing in total defiance against all threats that Trump has been able to mount against them. And I want to get into the specifics, so let's just get into the story. So, just a couple days ago, Donald Trump threatened Iran on Truth Social. He posted that the US will obliterate all of Iran's power plants if Iran doesn't fully open the Strait of Hormuz within the next 48 hours. So this is probably last Saturday, I believe. And then Iran responds with a counter threat that if Trump follows through with his threat, then Iran will be compelled to respond. And what they would do is they would completely shut down the strait. Completely and totally shut down the strait to everyone. And they will irreversibly destroy all vital, critical infrastructures in the Gulf, and that includes energy facilities, that includes IT, essential IT infrastructures, and what is also the most critical element here are water desalination facilities. That in that event, when Iran takes those out, there has to be major evacuations of major cities in the Gulf. Now, what happens after that is in the early hours of Monday, Trump puts out another Truth Social post. He says that the United States is having productive talks with the Iranian counterparts, and effectively they're doing a 5-day ceasefire. 5-day ceasefire, and they're going to hold back from targeted against Iranian energy infrastructures. Well, now it has been extended to another 10 days, but initially this was at 5 days. So right after that, the Iranians came out and they just clarified the fact that we're not having any talks or negotiations with anyone. And they put out a bunch of memes from their embassy in the States. They start trolling Donald Trump on social media. And what happens is that they also kind of mention the Iranian Speaker of the Parliament. He mentions that Trump is creating an illusion to manipulate the markets and try to get out of this quagmire that they just got themselves into, so that he gets time, so that he gets time until the markets close, and he can kind of work on his next course of action with regards to this war. Now, with particularly the analysis here, now if you look at the bond markets, if you look at the treasuries, how they reacted like as the news cycle flowed, and particularly on the 10-year yields on the treasuries, you notice that when Trump made the announcement that day at 7:04 a.m., the yields, they sharply fell from 4.45 to 4.32%. And then as soon as Iran denied Trump's Trump's negotiations, the yield rebounded to 4.38%. Now, the analysts are very clear on this, that the United States cannot afford the 10-year yield to be at a 4.5%. This is unsustainable. This is not something they could deal with. They could sustain it for a longer time. And then this 5-day ceasefire that Trump does, which has been extended to another 10 days, it's very interesting that if you notice that this 5-day ceasefire leads to the next weekend until the markets close. By when the U.S. and by the end of the 10-day ceasefire, what you have is another weekend, and hopefully it is expected by then. The analysts are expecting that by then, all of U.S. troops, will be in position for a major combat operation. And when the markets close, this gives him an opening to conduct a military operation in Iran and see how it transpires. What you can clearly notice is that he's playing the markets. This is a president whose foreign policy and his economic policies as well have been dictated by the markets, has been dictated by the stock markets. And he's clearly playing the markets in order to keep the U.S. treasuries safe. This is not even the first time this is happening. A lot of people have been taken off by surprise, and they think it's the first time that Trump is kind of causing, kind of playing the markets. But the last time Donald Trump, you could go back to when the tariff wars happened against China. That was the last time when he did it, and he kept and he kept like imposing this unprecedented amount of tariffs against China, and he kept hedging against them, and China wouldn't buckle for a moment, and then he puts out this announcement that we're currently having talks with China, when in actual fact he wasn't having these quote-unquote talks with China. So now, as far as the talks are concerned, these talks that he was talking about, these productive talks that he was talking about, what happens eventually is that we kind of find out that Pakistan is trying to emerge as this mediator, and they're trying to negotiate a deal, or help them negotiate a deal in order to end this war, because Pakistan also is part of this escalation potential. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a mutual defense pact with the Pakistanis. They could eventually be drawn into the conflict as well. So in order to prevent that from happening, what they do is they try to merge as this mediator. They try to propose Islamabad as this potential location for these talks to happen. And right now we are at the stage where they're having this informal, indirect talks with the United States. Iran and the U.S. are having these informal, indirect talks. What is happening here is that the U.S. is sending out its proposals. It's a 15-point demand. We're going to go into this if we have time today. And all of those 15-point demands actually look pretty similar to what they proposed before the war. And then Iran also has its own set of demands. It has its own list of demands, and none of the sides are willing to actually concede in a major way. Iran is just completely denying having a negotiation. They are not interested in having a negotiation, because if anything, what you can notice is that either side is not willing to concede, and particularly this is true from the United States side, because they don't want an Iran that has a nuclear weapon. They don't want to see an Iran that has the ballistic missile capabilities that it has right now after dealing with a lot of heavy blows from Iran. And what seems to be the case from the Iranian side, which is also true as well, that is, the United States lacks any credibility in making a deal. While they were negotiating the last deal in Oman, the United States just attacked them with Israel. The deal was within reach, and suddenly they just got attacked by the United States. So one side lacks a lot of credibility, and the other side is kind of busy doing Israel's bidding in the region, making Israel great again, making Israel more powerful in this region, sort of the superpower, a regional superpower in the region. In any case, we'll get into further into the attack that Iran has been able to mount against the Gulf states and Israel as well. Now, if we begin at the core of the Iranian defense strategy that we witnessed at the very beginning of the war, since the onset of the war, Iran has demonstrated the fact that they have been able to identify the weak point of U.S. defense strategy in the Middle East. Now, if in the case which was this Operation Epic Fury, where the United States launches major combat operations and strikes major targets within Iran, and so does Israel. Israel is within the range of Iranian ballistic missiles and within the range of them mounting these attacks with Iranian drones. But the United States is not within the range. Iran effectively lacks the capability of an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. So what they would have to do is target the US's interests in the region, and that being the client states that they have, which is essentially the GCC states, the Gulf states. And from the onset of this war, Iran has surprised the United States, with their unique ability to both risk horizontally escalating the battlefield by essentially widening the geographic landscape, the geographic scope of this war, by getting into war with a bunch of these Gulf countries. Well, essentially the idea is that they're going to attack the strategic interests, but also maintain the defensive line. The kind of argument that we are attacking U.S. interests in the region, we're not attacking the Gulf states per se. And also vertically escalating this war by using their unique set of weapons, their tactics, their asymmetric tactics, and the unique set of targets that they've chosen for this war. Now, Iran is focusing a large portion, a significant portion of their missile and drone bandwidth on the Gulf states and Israel, and they're specifically directed at U.S. military bases and their essential infrastructures. Now, what's more important here is that you can also notice that long before the war, Iran had already mapped this entire possible situation out, this potential war that was going to happen. They had mapped it all out. They knew that they can't win this war through conventional means, through a symmetric warfare tactic. So they would have to resort to inflicting serious economic and political pain on the United States, to the level that they started regretting entering the war in the first place. What Iran wants here from the United States is that it wants a war of attrition. It wants a prolonged war so that they could drain out and deplete the resources of the United States and the Gulf states as well. And they're doing it successfully. they're doing it pretty successfully. Iran has made 13 military bases of the United States uninhabitable. The soldiers, the U.S. troops are currently working remotely from hotels and their residences and whatnot. So this is a marker of success. And they're also creating massive financial losses. They are going after entities that are linked to U.S. Financial markets. And the greatest of them all is the fact that Iran is sending U.S. soldiers back home in body bags. They've so far killed 13 U.S. service members. 6 of them, they've killed them reportedly with a drone strike. This is the ability of the Iranian military, or the IRGC. Now, what's kind of really important here is kind of the tit-for-tat escalation that we've noticed over the past 2 weeks, when Israel went out to attack the South Pars gas field, which is kind of this big natural gas reserve that Iranians have, and also the Bushehr nuclear plant, which is a jointly operated nuclear plant by Russia and the Iranian government. When they went after that, when they attacked those sites, well, the Bushehr, to kind of further clarify this, the Bushehr nuclear plant was not directly attacked. Its vicinity was attacked. So there was kind of an impending threat that it will get attacked. Now, Israel is pretty careful about attacking Russian regional interest in Iran. It does not want to escalate to that level as of yet, but it has kind of bombed the living daylights out of the South Pars gas field. Now, what happens after that is that Iran goes all in to bomb Qatar's LNG production facilities, which kind of produces 20% of the global LNG output. And if you can notice this, if you can make sense of this, that the Gulf is getting the bad side of the deal. They're getting the worst side of the deal. Their resources, their facilities are getting bombed to hell, where the United States is not dealing any internal blows within the continental United States. The reason why the Gulf states never got attacked was the US military bases. That was the logic before. Now what happens to be the logic is that they're getting attacked because of the US military bases. The US military bases are no longer the guarantors of safety for the Gulf states. So the security imperative for the Gulf states is just lost. The special economic military relationship that the Gulf states have enjoyed for far too long with the United States, the logic of that is slowly fading away. Now, what's also important to kind of that we've also observed is the fact that Iran has gone after Israel's nuclear facility. Now, they did not launch directly an attack on the nuclear facility itself. They attacked the cities of Dimona and Arad. The attacks were pretty close to Israel's nuclear facility in Dimona, which is the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center. Now, this is a demonstration of strike capability. They effectively haven't hit the nuclear center yet, but they have shown that we are perfectly capable of conducting these attacks. Iran is essentially sending a message that we can successfully evade your superior Israeli air defense systems, be it the Arrow systems, the Davis Sling system, your Iron Dome. We can successfully evade all of them, and we can penetrate all of those defenses, and we can cause total chaos. Iran seems to be claiming total escalation dominance on the battlefield, and in a way that is unprecedented, that's never been seen before. Now, speaking of this power demonstration, there's the news cycle was also flooded with reports of the fact that Iran apparently, allegedly, has fired missiles at Diego Garcia. So Diego Garcia is this island within the Indian Ocean. It houses this joint UK-US military base, jointly operated by both of them. And when the attack happened, when allegedly those missiles were shot, right after that you had Israeli sources, Israeli news channels kind of flooding the news cycle. They kind of disseminating the idea that now the Europeans, the Brits, particularly London, is now within the range of Iranian ballistic missiles. The message they're sending is that Europe is now within range, and they're trying essentially to drag in European countries. They're trying to drag in Europe into this war, which Trump has failed despite his best efforts. And now you might have the IDF possibly trying to carry out these false attacks and trying to accomplish exactly that. And so far, it hasn't been achieved yet. There hasn't been any major step up from the European powers to be a part of this war, because they have seen how the energy markets have reacted, and they kind of can sort of predict the escalation spiral that could result if they also engage in this war. So they're kind of holding back at this moment. And Israel seemingly might be willing to drag in their European allies into this war, because that is essentially the goal of Israel. They cannot fight the war alone. They have the United States. They're going to make it even worse by dragging in the European allies into this war. And they're trying to escalate it even further. And I really want to get into the kind of the strategy that comes to Iran's ability to continually do these strikes. But before that, I actually want to go into the historical background. Well, not historical background. It was more about the background that transpired before the actions of the Gulf states that transpired before the war effectively began. So, despite Iran's ability to horizontally escalate this war, what we've seen is that the Gulf states are continually making the wrong choices over and over again. Right now, some of the states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are talking about engaging with the United States and Israel in major combat operations in essentially a war with Iran. And there are other countries which are willing to stay back. In this case, it is Qatar, Oman. They don't want to engage in an active war with Iran because they can sort of predict how it could spiral out of control. So before the war even began, as we've discussed in our previous episode, the Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman, he goes to the United States, he goes to Washington, and he meets a bunch of US officials, and he clearly says to Donald Trump, in these reports, as it states, that if President Trump does not follow through with his threats, then it would embolden the Iranian regime. And essentially, he's sort of telling Donald Trump that you need to follow through your threat in some capacity. And on the other, so essentially, you have two different pictures. You see, in the public domain, in the public, you see Saudi Arabia and the UAE essentially telling the Iranians that we're not going to let our land, we're not going to allow our airspace, our country to be used as a staging ground for this war against you. And privately, they're sort of pushing the Americans, they're sort of pushing Washington, they're pushing Donald Trump to wage this war. And in the beginning hours of the war, what you see is the Iranian response was almost calibrated in order to deal heavy strikes on these countries that have taken part of this in this effort to launch the war against them. Their response was not erratic. Their response was very strategic, and they had it mapped out to the T. They strategically targeted American military bases. The message they were sending: hey, we're not in war with the Gulf states. We don't want war with you. We're just attacking the U.S. military bases. And also the argument about them attacking these cities and whatnot, some of the towers and hotels and some of the civilian infrastructures were attacked. And essentially their message was that we're not in war with you. And people had perceived the fact that these strikes, what are currently being mounted, are imprecise attacks because Iran does not have precise munitions. It does not have this precision strike capability that the United States and Israel does possess. Eventually, as they extended these attacks to the essential infrastructure, to the critical infrastructure in the Gulf, this is where the leaders of the Gulf states begin hoping. They began hoping that the United States would effectively degrade and effectively neuter Iran's capability to launch missiles and drones in retaliation for the U.S. attacks and Israeli attacks. And what happens is that never materializes. There's reports of the U.S. and Israel degrading Iran's missile launching capability. It has taken out majority of their ballistic missile stockpile. It has taken out major arsenal that they possess. And they even went out of their way to decapitate the Iranian government. They kill the supreme leader. They effectively kill a bunch of other political leaders. And yet the missiles keep coming. The drones keep coming. 3 weeks into the war, Iran's capabilities, 4 weeks into this war, Iran's retaliation capabilities, Iran's warfighting capabilities are yet to be totally decimated. They're still retaliating. Now, despite this massive miscalculation, they're now choosing to go on the offensive. They're trying to make it even worse. And they're trying to join the US and Israel in combat operation. But my question is this: what are the Gulf states trying to achieve? Or what are they signaling that they are going to achieve by fighting a war with Iran that the US and Israel have not achieved with their superior strike forces and kind of really advanced, the most top-notch technology that there is? And what additional military edge do they have in order to achieve that? I feel like they're still being delusional in thinking that they could end this war militarily. The only way, this sort of thinking, what it does is it only escalates this war. The escalation potential is infinite. It could get worse and worse and worse and worse. And they're not even taking a note of this. Escalating this even further will only make it exponentially difficult to find a diplomatic off-ramp that all the parties could take to save face. Because at the end of the day, the Iranian government would have to save face. Otherwise, the hardliners would be like, hey, what the hell are we doing here? We're supposed to fight the United States and Israel to the end. Now, the fact that Iran has not capitulated shows that this war cannot be ended on military means. You're bringing in now a massive strike force. You're building your troops in order to invade an Iranian island, but would you be able to successfully carry that out without having major casualties on the battlefield? And by essentially destroying Iran's will to continue this war even further. That doesn't seem to be the case, because this has to do with how Iran is conducting their operations in the battlefield. And before we even go there, I want to shift our focus at the US and Israeli objectives, the motivations that the US and Israel had in getting into this war, and the incentives that drew them into believing that they could win this war faster than they actually thought in the very beginning. Now, what we have is that weeks leading into this war, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he goes on the Hill and he says that we clearly knew that the Israelis were going to attack, and this would precipitate an attack on US forces, so they just preemptively went and attacked Iran in a joint combat operation with the Israelis. What you also notice is that a day before the war even began, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the Omani Foreign Minister Badr Abu Saidi, he did an interview with CBS News, and he tells them that a deal is within reach. The Iranians and the US counterparts have worked towards a deal. And Iran was ready to make major concessions that they've never made before. It was unprecedented on that level. They were essentially ready to stop accumulating nuclear material. They were ready to enforce zero stockpiling. They were ready to degrade their current stockpile and irreversibly convert their existing stockpile into fuel. They were also ready to open up their nuclear facilities to the IAEA to conduct full and comprehensive verification process in order to ensure that they're living up to the deal. Now, right after that, what you have the United States and Israel immediately launching an airstrike against Iran. They launched this insane bombing campaign against them, and then the war was in full flow. Now, Trump's expectation, as was the expectation in Tel Aviv, was the fact that within a week they were going to take out the supreme leader. They're going to take out their top leadership. They're going to take out their military capabilities and whatnot. We're going to wipe it off. They're going to wipe the board off by just eliminating the top leadership in the system, and the system is just going to fall like a domino. What happens is that the Iranians just still keep retaliating. They just still keep launching their ballistic missile. They keep launching their drones, and Iran just keeps functioning like a dead hand system. It just keeps attacking. They also then go after the Iranian police stations. They go after their internal security services. They attack the besieged forces. The U.S. response starts to become more frantic. And it was a strategy that they have kind of created at the spur of the moment, that and Trump and Netanyahu were very, very confident, and so was the IDF and Mossad. Their agents on the ground were very confident that once they take out the regime's internal security apparatus, what would happen is that they could stir up a rebellion, they could stir up a popular uprising from the inside that could consume the Islamic Republic from within, and essentially what would happen is that a regime change would follow suit. But that never materializes. That plan never truly materializes. And what we end up is with an IRGC which is largely in control of the country. It's more hardline, and despite the fact that they've eliminated the previous supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, his son is now in charge. He's been elected into power, and now he's in no mood to negotiate with the United States, because you killed his dad and you tried to kill his mom. He essentially tried to wipe out his entire family, and this is also in alignment with much of the IRGC. They don't want to end this war on the US's and Israel's terms. They want to end it on their terms. And they're going more hardline than ever in order to achieve a state where the United States has endured so much pain. It's inflicted with so much pain that it builds a deterrence. It builds the Iranian deterrence to the level that the Americans don't come back attacking them after every 3 months or 6 months. It builds a deterrence of decades. And that's what the Iranians are effectively trying to do. Now, they've inflicted so much pain. They've inflicted so much pain on U.S. strategic interests that Trump has been forced to give Iran a 30-day sanctions relief on their oil in order to stabilize the markets, in order to stabilize the energy markets. Now get this, Iran used to produce 1.1 million barrels a day for $65 a barrel. And now they produce 1.5 million barrels a day for $110 a barrel. And they're also using alternative currency mechanisms in order to receive payments for this oil. If anything, Trump and Netanyahu's war on Iran has ended up delivering the Iranians a de facto sanctions relief after 3 weeks of the Iranians going out bombing all of the Gulf states in kind retaliation. 2026, Iran is actually ascending. Now, if anything, the people of Iran, who were actually expected to go against the regime, they're rallying around the flag. They are standing united behind the government at the face of American aggression. And more so, when a Tomahawk missile hits an Iranian girls' school and it kills around 170 Iranian girls, school-going children, who were apparently supposed to be liberated by the United States and Israel from their hijabs. And this is what happens. They kill them. And this is the responsibility, this is the fault of every one of those people who have granted legitimacy, every one of those useful idiots who have granted legitimacy to these attacks by actually supporting the protests, which were backed by the Mossad and the CIA. And that level of public support, it just emboldened these people, these Zionists and the Americans, in order to attack Iran and launch this devastating war. And at this stage, now they're just killing women and children. That seems to be like very, very frustrating to this level when people don't understand politics and they don't understand how these power dynamics work. And when you support movements, when you support protests without even understanding the reason why these protests are occurring right now at this moment, without even knowing these things, when you just de facto support a certain bunch of people without doing your due diligence, without doing the due diligence research, that is what happens. In any case, now Iran, besides attacking critical energy infrastructures in the Gulf, they've also now shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and it's been shut down for the past 3 weeks now, I believe, or probably even more than that. And they've done so in order to exacerbate the amount of pain they can inflict on American interests in the region. U.S. forces, in order to kind of open up the Strait of Hormuz, they've tried to eliminate the Iranian Navy. They've eliminated several Iranian assets. There are several ships, and they've even attacked one of the Iranian Navy ships in the Indian Ocean, and they just tried to wipe the Iranian Navy off. And the logic was, if you wipe the Iranian Navy off, if you just effectively destroy all of their naval assets, you could just free up the Strait of Hormuz. It's open, you just go in there, you can safely transit your ships. Or probably that was the logic of the United States. What happened was that yet after all those significant efforts to have naval superiority over Iran, they still couldn't open up the Strait of Hormuz. And the strait, now physically it is open. According to Iranian rules, the Americans or American allies are not allowed to transit through this route, through the strait. And insurance companies are also scared of taking the liability if the ships get attacked by Iranian ballistic missiles and their cruise missiles and whatnot. Iran has deployed several midget submarines. They have kamikaze drone boats, suicide drone boats. They have GPS jamming technologies deployed over there in the seas in order to follow through with their threats. And earlier you had the UK MTO, which reported 4 hits on oil tankers. And recently there were even a couple more hits recently on oil tankers that were unlawfully trying to transit the strait. And the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, despite all of these efforts. It is still closed, and it's massively raising the cost of conducting this war. This has effectively created the largest oil supply shock in history. Now, according to some analysis that we have made here, the price of oil is gonna hit its all-time high. Goldman Sachs has done its analysis. They're putting the number at $147 with the assumption that it will be a full 10-week disruption. And even if the Strait of Hormuz were to open up tomorrow morning, somehow it would still take months for the markets to stabilize. So the market disruption is very huge here. And there's more problems too. There are countries which are starting to reevaluate the risks of their heavy concentrated Middle Eastern capacity and have like that sort of risk that happens to have merged all of a sudden. And what this will do is it will raise a security premium on the price of oil. It will add that into the long term, and it will drive oil prices. And then with the current supply shortage, countries will also have to replenish their strategic petroleum oil reserves, and that creates a long-term demand, so prices go up even more. Now, this is just the Strait of Hormuz. The Houthis have just joined the war. Now, if they started enforcing a full blockade on the el-Mandeb Strait, good luck. Good luck with this entire chaos it will cause in the markets. They might be awaiting direction from their joint command, and they may very well be delaying action on that and in order to keep this as a knockout card for the 0 hour. This could make things even worse for the markets, for the United States and the Gulf states and Israel and whatnot. Alright, now that we've discussed the political and the economic aspects of the war, I want to get into the military strategy that is at play here. And particularly the Iranian military strategy and how they're countering the United States and Israel. So first things first, how is the Iranian government, how is the Iranian military still maintaining a functioning military order despite the fact that their supreme leader has been assassinated and their top military and political leaders are currently being assassinated? How are they still doing that? Now, the 12-day war actually woke them up to the reality that war is looming on their heads, and they would have to have a working strategy in place so as to defend their homeland. Now, I need to clarify how the Iranian government works here, how the Iranian system works here, how the Iranian military and the IRGC work. First, you have the Iranian government, which is the highest, which represents the highest political civilian entity in the entire nation, and then you have the IRGC, which is the most powerful armed force that has extensive control over the economy, and it has control over the military strategy of the axis of resistance. And their task, their primary task, and perhaps their most essential task, is to defend and to protect the Islamic Revolution. And they only answer to the supreme leader. And then you have the Artesh, which is the regular Iranian army. It's the national army like most other nations do. And their job, their primary task is to defend the sovereignty of the Iranian homeland. Now, the Iranian military thinkers have thought that they kind of knew that if the enemy were to attack, they would first off lead with the decapitation strike against the supreme leader and then follow suit with attacks on their military and political leaders. And that's how the domino falls if you have a centralized system. So in this case, what they did was they activated the Mosaic defense doctrine. So this is a security system. This is a decentralized system where control is delegated to lower level commanders, so that the military can still operate independently if communication with the central command is broken. So what they essentially did was they drew up contingency plans which were pre-approved by the supreme leader way before the war even began, probably months or years leading up to this war. They divided the IRGC into 31 semi-autonomous units, 31 independent groups, which have their own province. They're operating from their own province. They're spread out across 30 provinces and one for Tehran. And each of them have a military of their own. They have their own leadership. They have their own intelligence units, and they have their own arsenal of drones, missiles, and whatnot. So the idea here is to keep the body functioning even if the head is struck. Now, this plan works at two levels. First, you have the US's military advantage, which is in high-end air power, and then precision strike capability, superior intelligence, recon, and surveillance capabilities as well. Now, the Mosaic defense system, the Mosaic defense strategy, how it works, it can asymmetrically counter those threats by heavily decentralizing the system to the extent that a single strike, that a single attack on the leadership cannot take out the entire system, and therefore it cannot end the war on the US's terms. And then secondly, it makes the war politically, economically, and militarily exhausting for the United States, because this defense strategy gives the army high endurance. And that is exactly how they survived the initial shock, and that is how they're continually absorbing the repeat shocks, and they're still able to retaliate through multiple channels, and they're raising the costs of a prolonged war. Now, as the Iranian foreign minister said, that this is the product, the Mosaic defense is a product of over 20 years, studying 20 years of American military defeats in the East and the West, and that is Mosaic defense. Now that we've kind of explored the Iranian military strategy here, let's kind of go into the US and the Israeli strategy. Now, the problem with the US military and Israeli military strategy is that it was totally not practical at all. From the beginning of the war, the course of action that they pursued has ended up to be a massive strategic miscalculation. General Kane, who is Trump's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has warned him about getting into this war with Iran. He warned him that that the American munition stockpile in the region has been depleted by their support for US and Israel in the multiple wars that were fought before by their allies. And on top of that, they don't have enough critical munition support, and they don't have enough support from their allies, and this would put American troops at very, very heavy risk. This is the same general who went all in for the operation in Venezuela earlier this January, and this is the same person who was actually asking the administration to exercise caution about getting into this war with Iran. During the negotiations, Trump was apparently surprised when the Iranians did not budge, despite the fact that he had concentrated a massive strike force package in the region with the US's Abraham Lincoln and the US's Gerald Ford in position for conducting these strikes against Iran. And then Iran was actually ready to make concessions, and he didn't take the deal. And Trump just kept lending his ear to the Israelis over and over again, and it kept making it more difficult for the Iranians to accept the deal, because the Israelis were essentially poison pilling the deal from within. And when the war was in full flow, the Americans actually overestimated their capacity to defend their Gulf allies and their strategic assets. There are just so many vulnerabilities in the region and so many sitting targets for Iran to hit, including the oil facilities that are being struck right now across the vast expanse of the Middle East. There's way more strategic assets than you could even think of. American interceptors and their early warning systems, they only cover a very, very limited space. And in order to protect those strategic assets, you'd have to deploy these defense systems in insane numbers across the vast expanse of the Middle East. And US military assets are already spread out very, very thin. Now, since they're running out of interceptors, they are now reportedly moving some critical munitions which were initially deployed to fend off the Russian and Chinese threats. They're being moved away from those positions and they're deployed in this front against Iran. And there's also the fact that they cannot replenish these missiles overnight, and it takes a lot of time to produce them, and they're very, very expensive. Now, the Trump administration is making the argument that they're successfully wiping out Iran's ballistic missile capabilities and hitting them hard and taking out their missile stockpiles and whatnot. Now, Iran might be shooting far less missiles and drones than they were in the initial phases of the war, but now they're conducting far more precise strikes than ever. The Russians are also providing them with intel on US assets, and they're also providing them with satellite imagery on these American targets that the Iranians are actually hitting at the moment. On top of all of that, the US has made losses of around $4 billion in the first few weeks, and this has been accelerating as the war goes on. And they've lost critical weapon systems, they've lost Reaper drones, they've lost several F-15s. The Iranians have reportedly shot down an F-35 and F-15 as well. And they're losing refueling aircrafts. They're losing a bunch of radar systems. They've lost satellite communication terminals in their bases in the Middle East. And apparently they've also lost a THAAD defense system in the UAE. The USS Gerald Ford, which was supposed to be this heavy strike force against Iran, this is an aircraft carrier which is supposed to be the most expensive and one of the most offensive piece of asset that the United States has, is now out of commission, apparently after a fire in the laundry system of the ship. This is very suspicious that the ship is out of commission for 2 weeks, that is offline for 2 weeks, and it's not going to return anytime soon due to maintenance and other reasons. It's not going to return, and the United States government hasn't disclosed any of the information as to why this has happened. The cost of this war is estimated to be way over $11 billion. And despite the rising and the fueling costs, Trump is asking Congress for another $200 billion in supplemental funding for this war campaign to go on. A week ago, they deployed the first Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is composed of over 2,000 U.S. combat troops, U.S. Marines, who have been sent to the Middle East for a potential land invasion of the Kharg Island. And this is where the Kharg Island thing comes in. So essentially, I want to give you a primer of the whole thing. It's a small piece of land that is around 50 nautical miles from the coast of the Iranian mainland and is connected to the Iranian mainland through this pipeline. It produces around 90% of Iranian crude oil exports, and they export it to the rest of the world from this island. Now, the Americans are keen on taking over Kharg Island, and specifically for a singular purpose, and that is to control the Strait of Hormuz, so that they could dictate the next set of terms in this war. Now, what's possibly in the play here is that Trump is going to pursue this high-stakes operation to occupy this land, and in order to save face and say that Iran hasn't forced out of this conflict, rather it is we who are going to dictate the next term of this war by pressuring the Iranians into a corner. We now control their exports, we now control the strait, and that could possibly lead to an off-ramp. Now, this escalation is probably going out of control because they're also deploying an additional military unit, which is the 82nd Airborne Division, which is a 3,000 soldier combat brigade. It is a rapid deployment unit who are always ready for deployment across the world, anywhere in the world within 48 hours, within 18 hours actually. They're moving in additional 5,000 troops. They're talking about bringing in another 10,000 troops in addition to the airborne units and the current existing the U.S. Marines. What's likely here is that they're going to pursue some sort of an amphibious operation once the appropriate combat power has been marshaled into the region and it's in position for such an operation. Personally, I can't actually see how this works out for the US, because in order to get to Kharg Island, you have to first cross the strait. And once you cross the strait, even if you manage to cross the strait, you're entering a no man's land in the Persian Gulf. And there has to be layers of protection that you offer to your combat troops there, who are en route to the island, who are going to conduct these war operations in order to keep them safe from Iranian Shahed drones and their cruise missiles and whatnot. You need to provide layers of protection for that to happen. And let's say even if you get to take over the island somehow, it will be very, very tough to keep hold of the island. And even if you do, in the worst case scenario, what it would possibly end up is like a Bay of Pigs type situation where the Iranians get several American POWs, they take American prisoners, and they hold more leverage against the United States on the negotiating table. And the escalation ladder, as I said, there is an infinite potential for escalation in this war. Because at the end of the day, if the Iranians kill the American soldiers or take them as prisoners, this could serve as another reason for America to de-escalate. At least that is the logic in operation here, where the Americans are saying that, hey, we're not giving in. We are the world's most powerful military. We cannot give in. We have to escalate this conflict in order to de-escalate, in the sense that we're going to dictate the terms. We're not going to let the Iranians dictate the terms to us. In practicality, Iran cannot simply just accept any deal that leaves American and Israeli forces in a position that they're going to reinforce their missile stockpiles, they're going to reinforce their munitions, and they're going to come back stronger next year. They can't let that be the case, because for the longest time they've watched Israel's mowing the lawn strategy in the Middle East, where they've been attacking Hezbollah, where they've been attacking Hamas. For years they've seen this, and they deeply regret the moment that they had in the 12 Days War, where they actually could have pressed their advantage during the 12-day war when they had the momentum. From Iran's perspective, what is the case is that as long as US military bases remain dotted in the Middle East, any ceasefire is just a temporary pause before the next round of strikes. For them, it is only acceptable. It is only acceptable that the threat is fully and completely and permanently removed from the doorstep in order for this conflict to sensibly end. And what seems to be the case on the American side is that they're not willing to budge either. The Iranians are not willing to budge. The Americans are not willing to budge. As long as someone is not willing to budge, someone is not willing to pursue a diplomatic off-ramp, because at the end of the day, it can't necessarily be a saving the face for both sides. Someone would have to take the L. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. Remember to smash the subscribe button, smash the like button, and leave a comment on what do you think about the show. Special thanks to everyone for tuning in. We love you guys. Keep following the show. Now, I want to make sure that we want to do this on a consistent level every week. At least that's the hope. At least that's the expectation. That's the effort that goes in every week to make that happen. Hopefully, I will come back next week. I'll see you soon. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Godspeed.
Get your soul.